Minute, just waiting for it to come through on the watch page. All right, there we go. Hello and welcome. This is Michele Christensen of One Noteworthy Life, and this is episode 13 of the Take Note Chat. Today we're going to be talking about getting things done, or GTD, and OneNote. If you don't know me, I am Michele Christensen. I host the OneNote Bullet Journal Facebook group. I'm a creator here on YouTube, and I'm also a blogger at One Noteworthy Life. I'm a big OneNote fan, and I use OneNote in just about every area of my life to keep everything organized and moving forward. If you're watching live, you can add your questions, comments, thoughts, or suggestions are more than welcome in the chat box at any time. And if you're catching the replay, you can add those things in the comment section on this video. If you do post or share about this chat on social media, I would love it if you'd use the hashtag TakeNoteChat so that we can find each other's posts. So before we go any further, I want to address sort of the obvious fact that my usual co-host, Jared DeCamp, is not with us today. He has stepped away from the chat to make some time in his life for other endeavors. And I'm sure you'll agree with me that his presence will be greatly missed, but I do wish him the best of luck in the new things that he's doing in his life. I do plan on continuing the Take Note Chat. I've got some ideas on how to continue on with it, and some things I might do the same and some things I might do differently. So do make sure you're subscribed here and that you've got the notifications turned on so you know when future Take Note Chats happen. This particular chat was already scheduled and had been announced, so I decided just to go ahead with it even after Jared stepped away. So this will be my first time flying solo. So if you could just give me a little bit of slack in case I fumble with anything. So I am going to go ahead and share my screen here. And let me just check that that's coming. Yep, looks like that's coming through properly. Okay, there we go. So the first thing I want to talk about is what is Getting Things Done, or GTD. It's a book and productivity system that was first written in 2001 and revised in 2015. Some of the problems that GTD may help with are things like unclear boundaries of your work. This was true in 2001, and I think it's even more important today. A lot of people work remotely or can work from anywhere, so work hours aren't as clearly defined. And I think as more and more people work with more and more knowledge, and there's other things like startups where there's not a lot of staff, the idea is that you may not have a clear picture of what your job is and isn't. So another problem that GTD seeks to help with is that you probably have more things that you want to do and can do and should do or need to do than you could possibly ever do in your lifetime. So we need some way of handling that and managing it. Another GTD problem that it seeks to address is distractions. And again, I think this was true in 2001. I think it's even worse now. Distractions, especially for people who work connected to the internet or have their phones handy at work, those distractions can just be constant. Another problem is that I think it's really difficult to try and remember everything that we need to remember for people that live in like kind of a modern lifestyle. It kind of creates this nagging feeling of, did I remember this? Did I do that? When is this? Did I write that down? That kind of thing. So that's another problem that GTD seeks to help with. And I just want to mention as well that I am using a lot of my own language here. These things are addressed in the book, but I wanted to use my own language, not only to respect the copyright of the book, but because I'm assuming that you have or may want to read the book, and that source material is presented in the book way better than I could present it. So that's why I'm not using the exact GTD language. In the next section, of the GTD book, they talk about possible outcomes you could get from implementing the GTD system. So the first outcome I want to talk about is called mind like water. And this is a martial arts expression. And it has to do with if you toss a pebble into a body of water, it creates tiny little ripples. But if you throw a much bigger rock, it creates much, much bigger waves and a much bigger impact. So the water responds exactly as it should. It responds in perfect proportion to whatever event changed it. And that's how we want our minds to be. We want our minds to be ready to react and able to react perfectly to whatever comes our way. Another concept you might get with getting things done is the ability to be more present. And I don't mean this in any sort of abstract way. It's more that whatever you're doing, you can be focused on that thing when you're doing it, rather than having this kind of background soundtrack in your brain of, oh, did I remember that? Did I write that down? Am I ready for the party this weekend? Oh, when was that appointment that I forgot? When is my oil change due? Those things take us away from being present. And if you can have a trusted system that makes sure that you have all these things under control and that you're on top of them, you can actually be more present for whatever you're doing right now. One more outcome I want to focus on is GTD helps you to be at peace with what is not getting done. At any given time, you can really only be working on one thing, multitasking aside, but you're saying no to hundreds or perhaps thousands of other things. So it's equally important to be at peace with what you're saying no to as it is to be focused on and know that you're working on something important right now. So that's just a little bit of background of the GTD system. What I'm going to show in this chat session is 3 big areas of getting things done that have been really positive for me to implement in OneNote. I do want to make a note, though, that GTD is independent of the tools you use to implement it. You could use an all-paper system, you could use OneNote, you could use apps, or any combination thereof. The system is really, made to be used for any kind of tools. I just happen to use a lot of OneNote, so that's what I'm going to be showing. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and check the chat. If you have anything to add on this introduction to GTD or anything you want to share about your personal experience, go ahead and type it in the chat box now. So we're getting a couple hellos and someone going to bed. So good night, sleep tight. We'll see you later when you come back. So one of the reasons I wanted to do this particular topic for the chat is that getting things done was really life-changing for me. And I know that term gets thrown around a lot, but I would say of the top, sort of 10 things that have pointed the direction in my life, this would be one of them. I first read the book a few years after it came out, so sometime in the early 2000s, and I've read it multiple times since then. I kind of revisit it every year, and the principles taught in this book and system have become really deeply embedded in the way I think. So I really do feel like in certain ways, it's really has shaped my life. And it's also, I think, helped my life to be better. I feel like I've been able to tackle projects I may not have otherwise and that kind of thing. The other thing I want to say is I am not a GTD purist. There are people who are just sort of diehard fans, and there are forums and groups and things like that. And I do love participating in that. I love seeing what people have to say and that kind of thing. But I myself am not a purist. I use just the parts of the system that work for me, and some of them I don't use. And I just want to emphasize that again, the same way you can use whatever selection of tools that you want to use, you can also pick and choose the parts of the system and how and when you implement them and do it at your own pace. Okay. So I'm going to go back to, sharing my screen here. So the 3 big areas of the GTD system that I'm going to show today are capture, the concept of project versus next action, and context. And I'll explain these a little bit more, but if you've read the GTD book or you're familiar with the system, you'll know what these are. So capture is the very first step of the GTD process of handling your incoming items. And what it means is that you have a set place to capture and hang on to incoming items until you have a chance to process them. A physical example of this might be your physical mailbox or like an in tray on your desk where mail piles up until you have a chance to deal with it. And then a digital example might be your email inbox where incoming emails sit until you have a chance to read and decide what to do with them. It's not really realistic for most people to have just one capture point because we have different ways that information comes our way. We have an email inbox, a voicemail, text messages, postal mail, and that kind of thing. But I do think it's important to have a finite number of capture points and then a regular process to deal with them. OneNote lends itself really well to capture because it's available anywhere you have an internet connection or just your phone. So it's really easy to capture things and throw them into OneNote. And OneNote also handles a lot of different kinds of input. So I think OneNote is an excellent tool for capture. So I have two main capture points in OneNote. I use a today's notes section on my daily page, and then I use the quick notes feature in OneNote. I have a separate video on my today's notes section, and you'll find that linked under with the title Rapid Logging. And rapid logging is something I grabbed from the bullet journal system. But basically, I have a little section on my page every day where I jot down anything that's incoming, whether it's just something of interest, something I want to check out, an invitation, an event, something I need to do, whatever. And then as part of my setup for the next day, I process all those items. So it's two distinct steps. I jot it down and then I process it. And it really helps me to stay focused. Like if something if something comes my way, like say I'm on Facebook doing something for my business and I see an event I might want to go to, I don't need to stop and be distracted. I can just jot that event down. And then the next day, like I know that I'll process it. So I can go right back to what I'm doing. So that's kind of for little odds and ends that come in during the day, and then I process it the next day. The other place I have is called Quick Notes, and Quick Notes is a section in a notebook called Michelle's Notebook. You probably have a notebook with your first name, like Bob's notebook or Denise's notebook, with a Quick Notes section that was set up when you first set up your OneNote account. And prior to some recent updates, whenever I printed from my desktop to OneNote, it would go into the Quick Notes section. Now I can pick where I want it to go. But Quick Notes is a place where things often go if I send them to OneNote through another means. Like I use an Android phone, and so there's a badge on my phone, or a button, I should say, a floating button that I can use to just make a quick note and send it into Quick Notes. You can send things via email. You can print to OneNote. So this Quick Notes is the place where all of those things get put. And I make it a point to process those every week when I do my weekly setup. So there are multiple right ways to do this. The point is just to make sure you have designated capture spots and that you regularly process those items. The same would apply for capture points outside of OneNote, like an email inbox or a physical mailbox. So I'm going to go ahead and check the chat here. Yes. And shout out to Denise Vidoc, who is here on the chat, very active. She actually reached out to me because I was not super on top of my promotion schedule. So thank you, Denise. She says, if you have a device with Google Assistant, you can set it up to send note to self messages to a specific section in OneNote. So for example, a capture section. Exactly. Oh my gosh, that's a perfect example. So Denise is saying if you have a Google Assistant device, you can set it up to send a note to yourself in OneNote in a specific section. So that's an awesome tip. Thank you for that, Denise. Okay, so the second area I'm going to show is the difference between a project and a next action. Again, if you've read the GTD book, you're familiar with this concept of next action. I sometimes call it a task, so I sometimes interchange those. But in GTD, there is a concept called next action, which is the next action you can take right now to move something toward completion. A project would be something that requires a series of next actions. So sometimes something that you capture can just be a task or action all by itself. So, for example, if you need to schedule a dentist appointment, but that would just be a task. That's something you can just pick up your phone and do. If you need to find a new dentist, that might be a series of next action. Things like seeing who's in your insurance plan, getting some recommendations, reading some reviews, and then calling to make the appointment. So that's just sort of a simple example of the difference between a next action and a project. And that's actually been really helpful to me to help break things down into tiny little actionable steps so that they don't become overwhelming. And I'm going to give you an example right here. I'm working on a wall storage project in my garage, and I am now at a point where it's time to paint. And for some people, it might just be fine to be like, oh yeah, I'm going to paint. And it would just sort of automatically gel in their mind all the little odds and ends and the steps to do that. But for me, I find it easier to sort of back way up and say, okay, well, what's the first thing I need to do? Well, I need to make a list of the supplies I need. Then I need to see which items I have and which I need to buy and make a note of that. Then I need to go out and purchase the items, and then I need to prep the wall, and then I need to do my first coat of primer. So this is probably not mind-blowing for anybody, but it's a good example of a task versus project. And for me, breaking things into these steps really helps me to not be overwhelmed, and it helps me not to get sidetracked. I think when I have too big of something in my head, I can't see where to start. And so writing this down tells me exactly where to start and what to do. And it provides me with tangible evidence that the project is progressing, even when it looks like nothing is happening. And it also helps me to complete projects in shorter chunks of time. Like if I were to try and tackle this in one day, it would probably take at least half a day. But doing it in these little steps, I can tackle it in little 10, 15, 20-minute or 1-hour chunks. And it's much easier for me to find those smaller chunks of time than it is to find bigger chunks of time. Now, these boxes that you see here to the left of each of these items is a to-do tag. You find the tags in your home menu. I'm going to go all the way over here to my right and show you a drop-down menu, and it's right here. So I love the to-do tag, and I'm really, really picky, though, that if I have a to-do tag on something, that it's a next action as defined by GTD. So that means I could do it today or after the items that come before it. And if something is a project, I'll usually put it on its own page with an individual next action item on one line with a to-do tag. So like today, for example, if I was going to start some of these, I probably wouldn't do them all today, so they would not be on my daily page. They'd be sitting in a page that's about this garage wall project. All right, so I'm just going to go ahead and check the chat. We don't have anything new there, so going back here. Okay, so the third big element I want to show you is the idea of context. And this, I think, of all the things I learned from GTD, was arguably the most useful. The idea is that the next actions you take to complete a project occur within a context. And usually that context is a physical setting. So it's like the physical place where a next action can be done. So for example, if you're talking about running errands, you might need to be in your car. For me, I work on a lot of home improvement projects, and so I need to be like in my work clothes and ready to get dirty if I'm doing that. And sometimes a project requires tasks to be completed in multiple contexts. So I'm going to go back to that list of my painting project, and I've added the context to these steps. So the first step, make a list of supplies. Well, I only need to be home for that. Same with the second, to see which I have and which I need to buy. The third step, which is to purchase the item, I need to be out running errands. So I do sometimes ride my bike or do errands on foot. So it's not necessarily in my car, but I do need to be out shopping somewhere to do that. The prep isn't really a messy project, so I can just be home. But by the time I'm ready to do that first coat of primer, I need to be in my work clothes and ready to get dirty. So this is just an example of how with this particular project, the tasks that are in it need to be completed in different contexts. Now, context is generally a physical setting, but I like to have a slightly more nuanced version of it. So I spend a lot of time at home. I do a lot of things at home, but I have different contexts for when I'm at home. So, for example, if I'm doing a home improvement project, again, that means I need to be in my work clothes and ready to get dirty. So that's work clothes. That's a context in my home, as opposed to just simply being in my home. I also have a context called admin. And again, this just occurs in my house. But for me, things like paperwork, financial stuff, taxes, bill paying, phone calls, appointments, that kind of stuff, I need to be in a specific frame of mind to do that kind of stuff. I don't really like doing it, and it's kind of like unpleasant for me. So I need to have like kind of, be awake, have good energy, and be ready to tackle it. And I also probably need to do it during what would be normal work hours for whoever I'm getting in touch with. So I live in the US, so this would have to be during whatever work hours, these companies have here in the US. Finally, I have a context for work, which is when I'm actually working on my business activities. So again, even though that's in my home, it's a separate context, and I try not to mix that with other things. So let me go ahead and check the chat here. Okay. So nothing there. So how can you show context in OneNote? Well, I'm a huge fan of tags, and those are, again, up here in this drop-down menu that I'm showing you. And there is an option now to create custom tags. So you could actually use tags, and I'm just going to put a tag on this just to show you how that would work. So that's what a tag would look like. And you can also search tags and things like that. So you could use tags, and I do love tags, but I don't use tags for context because, at least for now, tags are not as available on the devices I use as they are on my desktop. So I use a Windows desktop, Android tablet, and Android phone, and the tags just aren't as available on my devices as they are on my desktop. So just to keep things simple, I use color coding of my text. Now, if you're interested in tags, I do have a separate video on tags linked in the description. But I like using color coding because this is available equally easily across all of my devices, and it shows up easily, and it's kind of simple for me to use. So I use green for work. I use purple for house cleaning because I follow the Fly Lady system. That's just a system for taking care of your house and that kind of thing. So that's linked in the comments if you're interested. And the theme website on Fly Lady is purple. Everything's purple on their website. So I use purple for anything related to house cleaning. I use a yellow highlight for admin, and that's just so that it kind of stands out to me. And yellow is kind of like high energy and that kind of thing. So anything that's in that admin context, I use a yellow highlight. And then black is just everything else. So that's how I show my contexts. I created page every day, and so I'm pretty close in when I'm working on this stuff and setting up my day. So I don't need to be more specific than this. If you do need to be more specific, you can use more colors or more highlights, or you could use tags. There's plenty of ways to do it, but this just works for me, even though it may not be strictly GTD. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and check the chat once more. Okay, we got nothing there. All right, so I have just one more little section to show, and that is tips for implementing GTD, whether you do it in or outside of OneNote. So the first thing is read the book. There is tons and tons of like blogs and forums and groups and things like that, all devoted to GTD. But I would say start with the book. It's a really good read. It's well written, and it's the source material for all of this. So I would start there. Get familiar with the GTD flowchart. I didn't want to include it here just because I don't want to get any copyright issues, but there is a flowchart in the book. You can probably find it somewhere on the GTD website or elsewhere of how to process your incoming items. And it makes it sort of simple to decide when something comes in, like if you get an email, what to do with it. Like, what's the next step? What's the action that needs to be taken on that? So get very familiar with that. I think it's a great tool. My third tip would be to start small. I think not only is it a new system, but it's also changing a lot of the way you might be thinking. And that's really hard to do, kind of a wholesale change all at once. So start small, do it in whatever way, kind of whatever order works for you. And if there's something that you think would be really helpful, do that first. And then the final thing we've already touched on, which is to do it your way. I don't think there's any value in being more compliant to a system if it doesn't serve you. So just do whatever works for you. This is about improving your life and getting more of what you want out of life. So use GTD as a tool to do that. Okay. Let me stop sharing here. Ooh. Oh, okay. The name of the book, Kathleen, is Getting Things Done, The Art of Stress-Free Productivity by David Allen. It is linked in the comments. Ooh, okay, so Denise says, I don't know why I didn't think about that before. I need to create an action tag to add to all my to-do tags. Yeah, I like that, Denise. I think tags are just so great, and they're so visual. And with the custom tags, you can really have it look however you want. So that's awesome. So that is the end of today's content. So I am so happy that you are here today. Thank you so much. I was a little nervous to do this solo for the first time, but thank you to everyone who has been adding comments and that kind of thing. It's been really a pleasure to be here. So if you like today's chat, I would love it if you'd subscribe by hitting the subscribe button. And as a subscriber, you'll be notified of future Take Note chat sessions. So if you have any topics you want to see covered here, drop them in the comments below. I'm looking to kind of revamp what we're doing here, so I would love to see your suggestions. And I am planning to continue the Take Note chat, so there should be one in March. And I don't have specific details yet, so watch this channel to see when it's scheduled. Oh, thank you, everyone. People are putting nice comments there, so thank you. I appreciate it. I appreciate all your kind comments. So that is it. Thank you so much for being here. It has been my pleasure, and I hope to see you next month. Bye-bye.